Senator Ted Cruz, how are you, sir?
Mark, my friend, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Well, a little cold, but I'm hanging in there. But anyway.
Well, I'll try not to rub it in by letting you know that I made it out of D.C. last night, and it's 70 degrees in Houston and a beautiful evening.
Well, you just rubbed it in.
Okay. Anyway, so
all right, there we go.
But I at least expressed a little bit of guilt for doing so.
Well, listen, it seems like every time I turn around, when you take a principled position that should really not be controversial, you're being attacked. And I think you're being attacked because people are trying to drag you down in case, I'm not saying you are, in case you decide to make a run for the presidency. And I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal editorial. It's not even editorial. It's not even an essay. It's just a little screed. Ted Cruz hurts his party by forcing a meaningless debt ceiling vote. To we the people, this isn't meaningless. We want to know who stands where. And you keep saying over and over again, we face a catastrophe, and we have to start talking about it honestly with the American people.
Well, it is remarkable. In the 13 months I've been in the Senate, it has become apparent to me the single thing that Republican politicians hate and fear the most, and that is when they're forced to tell the truth. It makes their heads explode. And actually, look, this debt ceiling example is a perfect example, where the Republican members of the Senate, they all wanted the perfect show vote. So the whole fight was every senator in the Senate going to consent to allow a clean debt ceiling, to allow Barack Obama to get a blank check to raise our debt while doing nothing about spending, with just 51 votes. Now, in order for that to happen, all 100 senators have to consent to it. Now, there were an awful lot of Republican senators who thought that was perfect, because then they could all vote no and go home and tell their constituents, see, I voted no. I did the right thing. But it only happens if they allow it to happen. And all I did was very simple. I said, listen, when I told Texans when I ran for office that I'm going to fight with every ounce of strength I have to try to help pull this country back from the fiscal and economic cliff, I wasn't lying to them. I meant it. So if your ask of me is, will I consent to let Harry Reid do this on 51 votes, the answer is no. I will vote no at every stage against it because it's irresponsible, because it's wrong, because we're bankrupting our children. And Republicans' heads exploded because it meant, look, make no mistake about it, this was their desired outcome. An awful lot of the Republicans wanted exactly what Barack Obama wanted, exactly what Nancy Pelosi wanted, exactly what Harry Reid wanted, which is to raise the debt ceiling, but they wanted to be able to tell what they view as their foolish, gullible constituents back home they didn't do it, and they're mad because by refusing to consent to that, they had to come out in the open and admit what they're doing, and nothing upsets them more.
What really bothers me about this, Senator Ted Cruz, is this. I heard Mitch McConnell about 3 weeks ago on the Fox News channel with Chris Wallace say, this is where we're going to draw the line in so many words. No, there's not going to be, and I don't even like this phrase, clean debt ceiling. Nothing clean about this. There isn't going to be this debt ceiling vote unless something's done about spending. And 3 weeks later, you're the bad guy for requiring a roll call vote on this 60-vote rule. And I'm thinking to myself, we have another debt ceiling vote coming up in March of 2015. When will the Republican leadership, when will the Republican apparatus make the case to the American people, start now, to explain why their entire future is at stake if we vote for these things, if you vote for these things, without making even an attempt to dent the debt?
And the answer, unfortunately, is never. If we wait on Washington, if we wait on the entrenched politicians in Washington to make the case to stand up, hell will freeze over before that happens. But you know what? This is nothing new. That's true of entrenched power. It's always been true of Washington. And I think the answers don't come from the Washington, D.C. Beltway. The answers are going to come from America, from millions of people standing up and holding elected officials accountable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're right. And I think what you're trying to do is save the Republican Party. I think what you're trying to do is remake the Republican Party so it's more responsive. It's not so Washington-centric. And for that, you're being attacked by this entrenched ruling class. That's how I observe it. Am I right or wrong?
Well, you know, it's interesting. You remember just a few months ago when we were fighting, trying to stop the disaster that is Obamacare, where a lot of the Washington graybeards, they said, "Oh, you're so foolish."
Hold on now, I have a gray beard.
We're going to fight on the debt ceiling. That's where the fight will be. Look, I got to tell you, I recently had my staff print out a list of 3 pages of Republican senators, I might note, all the people that are running around the press saying nasty things about me, saying, we will stand on the debt ceiling and fight for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few months later, it's like they think the American people are just a bunch of rubes, that we don't remember what they say. And what drives them crazy, if you get outside of Washington, if you ask any American, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, should we live within our means? Should we stop racking up massive debts that are bankrupting our kids? The answer is, of course. I mean, this is not a partisan issue. This is basic common sense. And every one of those senators who's angry, when they go back home, they tell their constituents they're doing everything they can to stop it. But they don't actually want to do what they're saying. If 41 Republicans had stood together and just voted no, the clean debt ceiling, the blank check that President Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi want, would have been denied. And for all of them that say, oh, well, you're just a crazy rebel. Look, the last 55 times the debt ceiling has been increased, Congress has attached meaningful conditions to it 28 of those times. You want a demonstrated method, the only leverage point that has consistently been effective. If you look at Graham-Rudman, one of the most effective laws we've had for reining in government spending, it came through the debt ceiling. If you look at the Budget Control Act, which I might note, the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, has gone on great lengths how the Budget Control Act was this great act of virtue and principle. Now, they just threw it all overboard about a month ago, but right up until that point, it was a great act of virtue and principle. That came on the debt ceiling. What did we have to do something else like that? Actually have 41 of the Republicans stand together and say, no, Mr. President, we will not give you a blank check above 17 without meaningful reforms to stop the problem. The Republicans didn't want to do that, but they wanted to tell their constituents they had, and that's why they're very angry right now.
And I think they're also angry because there is a mindset, there is a culture there where there's a wink and a nod all the time. And this mindset and this culture is why Congress as a whole is at 13%. Does it get any worse than 13%? This can't continue like this. The nation can't continue like this. The Republican Party's not going to survive if it continues like this. How much more evidence do they need? They've lost 2 presidential elections, in my view, against a candidate who really wasn't that tough to beat, given his radical nature and the failure of his policies. They can't swing the Senate. They may swing it this time only if conservatives pour out, as we did in 2010. But what is it going to take? I almost asked this rhetorically, I suppose. But what is it going to take for them to change course?
The only thing that can change course,
we the people,
is the American people rising up. And, look, I think where we are is a lot like the late 1970s. Late 1970s, you had Jimmy Carter in the White House. You had terrible economic policies that produced the exact same economic stagnation, the same malaise we're seeing now. You had the same feckless foreign policy that made the world a much, much more dangerous place. And Washington Republicans in the late 1970s were every bit as hopeless. But what happened is all across the country there began to be a grassroots movement. Millions of men and women that became the Reagan Revolution. It was a lot of people who'd never been involved in politics and who understood these politicians in Washington are lying to me. Why is Congress at 13% approval rating? Because people don't like to be lied to. And that grassroots revolution in the 1970s transformed the country, pulled us back from the fiscal and economic cliff we were facing then. And what happened then is the Washington politicians got in line. Why? Because when the people rise up in overwhelming enough numbers, ultimately sovereignty lies in we the people. I think the path forward is exactly the same today.
But I notice, well, let's turn to Obama at this point. Obama with his executive orders. Rich, Mr. Producer, do you have that cut one there, please? I want you to listen to this, Senator Ted Cruz. This is Obama 5.5 years ago when he's running for president. I just want you to listen to this. Cut one, go.
I taught constitutional law for 10 years. I take the Constitution very seriously. The biggest problems that we're facing right now have to do with George Bush trying to bring more and more power into the executive branch and not go through Congress at all. And that's what I intend to reverse when I'm President of the United States of America.
You're a student of history. I'm a student of history. Obviously, the President of the United States is doing the opposite of what he said 5.5 years ago. I have never in my life seen a president conduct himself this way. I look throughout history, maybe FDR, but not really even FDR. I have never seen a president so brazenly and openly say, I'm going to break the rules, I'm going to defy my oath, I'm going to violate the separation of powers, undermine Article 1, and catch me if you can.
It is entirely unprecedented. It is one of, if not the most dangerous aspect of this presidency, is the contempt for rule of law and the consistent pattern of lawlessness. We've never seen a president who, if he doesn't agree with a particular federal law, simply refuses to enforce it, refuses to follow it. When he disagreed with immigration laws, he announced the federal government wouldn't enforce federal immigration laws. He did the same thing with marriage laws, with welfare laws, with drug laws. That's not the way our constitutional system works. And the most egregious example is Obamacare. Over and over again, the president says it's the law of the land, and yet over and over again, he brazenly violates the law. The law of the land, the text of the statute, says that the employer mandate kicks in January 1st, 2014. And yet he unilaterally violates the law and grants an exception, a one-year exception to his buddies in big business, directly contrary to the law. He did the same thing for members of Congress. The text of the law says members of Congress will be on the Obamacare exchanges with no subsidies, just like millions of Americans. Harry Reid, the Senate Democrats, came to him, said they didn't want to be under this law. And he unilaterally granted them exception, just violated the law. And the most astonishing example was when over 5 million Americans lost their health insurance because Obamacare made the plans they liked they had illegal. The usual thing that the 43 presidents who preceded President Obama would have done is to go to Congress to say, listen, this federal law, it's not working. Millions of people are hurting or losing their jobs. Let's change the law. That's the constitutional system. Instead, the president held a press conference where he instructed private insurance companies, go violate the law, issue policies that are illegal right on the plain text of the law. For 1 year, I'm telling you to do that. Now, there is no precedent in our history for a president of the United States to instruct private companies and private citizens violate the law with impunity because the president's telling you. And this, look, Mark, this ought to concern more than people like you and me. This ought to concern more than conservatives or Republicans. This ought to concern Democrats, independents, libertarians. This ought to concern anyone who believes the constitutional limitations on government are important to liberty, because when you have a president who can pick and choose which laws to follow and which to ignore, you no longer have a president.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ted Cruz, I want to thank you. We're out of time now, and I want to thank you for coming on. I understand now why the ruling class, the inside the beltway types, and their cheerleaders in the media despise you, because you're damn good. And you do want to shake things up, and you do want to advance liberty and constitutionalism in the country. So for my millions of listeners, I want to thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, my friend. And listen, this is not about any individual. This is about speaking the truth. And what is damn good, I think, are the millions of Americans who are fed up at people in Washington lying to us and are looking to get back to the free market principles, the constitutional liberties that made this country strong. Washington doesn't want to tell the truth, and the truth, you do this every night, Mark. It's why I love you. It's why you have an impact on this country, is you just stand up and speak the truth over and over again. And those who tell everyone the emperor is fully dressed when the emperor has no clothes. What they cannot stand is the purifying light of just telling the truth. Keep doing it. If the American people keep doing it, that's how we turn the country around.
You're great. God bless you, Senator. We appreciate it very much.